Welcome everybody to this session titled Beyond the Specter of AI, Algorithmic Bias, Systems of Power, and the Impact of Machine Learning on Contemporary Soundscapes. Very happy to be chairing this session, so let's get things underway. So our first speaker this morning is Eric Whitmer, who's a third-year PhD student in musicology at the University of Michigan. Their research draws from the fields of disability studies and digital studies and seeks to understand how and why people utilize music to make the world better, quote unquote, big scare quotes indeed. Oh, intended, sorry. Eric's most recent published work is forthcoming as a colloquy in the Journal of Music History Pedagogy, out this December on Access in the Music History Classroom, so check that out. Besides thinking and talking about music, Eric also plays music as a percussionist and a carillonist, and is the resident carillonist at Grosse Pointe Memorial Church. And this morning he'll be giving a paper, and I'm going to have to read out this title, sorry. I'll be Bach on compositional identity, machine learning algorithms, and the claims of computational composition. So let's welcome Eric.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay through the mic? Great. If it starts giving feedback, then we'll have more fun AMS things. Thank you, Dr. Drott, for the introduction, and thank you, Matthew and Kelly, for being lovely co-panelists. I'm excited to hear your work, and thank you, all of you, for braving 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning. I wish you the most amount of strength as we go through this next few minutes. I'll briefly mention that throughout the presentation, there'll be a QR code on the slides that will that will bring you to access copies. There is a digital copy of the handout that is on seats, the slide deck, and then also the reading script. 343 years after his death, Bach started composing again. Over the next 78.8 years in aggregated computing time, he wrote enough music that, if played continuously, would last for over 6 years. Or so the computer scientists at Google claim. In touting their contributions to artificial intelligence research, the company portrays Bach's music as a kind of tutor. They remarked, quote, "It's hard to write a good melody, let alone counterpoint, where multiple melodic lines need to sound good together. Like every music student, we turn to Bach for help." Let's listen now to a harmonization done by by Google's Bach imitation. I kept the MIDI to feel accurate to the transcription, so hopefully you will enjoy the rest of the MIDI piano effects throughout the presentation. Although portraying Bach's musical output as a source of compositional pedagogy is hardly breaking news, neither is the process of the automation of Bach-like composing. Here, Google joins a litany of other computer research projects that aim to imitate the composer. These projects date back to the late 1980s and represent a sustained disciplinary conversation in computer science about the task of automating Bach-like composition. Whereas artificial intelligence companies like Suno and Udio utilize the term generative music making, it is notable that the creators of these Bach-imitating programs prefer the term computational composition. Presumably invoking the prestige inherent in the title composer, these programs assume that artistry is bounded within the domains of musical notation and can be extrapolated through computation. Computational composition goes beyond the bounds of music theoretical scholarship to identify and prove a musical reason that has, until yet, been supposedly off limits to the human mind. Arguably, this is yet another example of Edward Kong's description of machine learning's propensity to be a methodology in search of an application. Utilizing the fundamental assumption of data science that if a data set has enough encoded information within it to generate new outputs, computer scientists regularly look for novel sites of application where a sufficient theoretical framework has been completed to generate a data set and adjudication parameters. Playing out over the past 40 years, algorithmic attempts to replicate the composition of Bach fit this model of computational intervention perhaps annoyingly well. Yet dismissing these algorithms as but one more errant and distracting AI technology misses an opportunity to acknowledge an important instance of Bach reception history, where Bach's music is being encoded into technologies as a distillation of musical knowledge. By examining the Bach created by computer scientists in 2 case studies from this corpus, I argue that projects such as Kamal Etchiolu's Chorale project and Feynman Liang's Bachbot rely on an assumed encoded objectivity that, while semi-legible to humans, is readily apparent to computers. This objectivity is what I am calling musical rationality, or a kind of calculated determinant of correct musical behavior from which all other music diverges. But first, let's talk about Bach chorales. As graduates of any Western art music program can attest, Bach chorales are standard parts of music curricula. In William Van Giest's dissertation on Bach chorales, he identifies them as a kind of music theoretical object, abstracted away from religious context to performance context, and eventually to music theoretical pedagogy. This abstraction from musical practice towards musical objectivity is an iteration of what historians Lorraine Daston and Peter Gallison call a working object. These objects are the test cases or representations that stand in for the two various natural worlds in a given discipline. This could be things like the atlas image, the laboratory process, or a type specimen. Although Van Giest does not cite Daston or Gallison, his dissertation very plainly lays out the case to consider the chorale as a kind of musical working object given its ubiquity and standardization. Working objects regularly appear as computational projects, and so it makes sense that Bach chorales have become such a test case for computational composition. In searching for computational composition efforts concerning Bach's musical output, I've amassed something like around the terms of 14 conference proceedings, 10 journal article preprints, 3 published journal articles, and 5 different books that range from 1986 to 2024. These publications represent many different approaches to the problem of how to compose like Bach, yet nearly all of these papers blur the distinction between composing like Bach and compositional capability. To illustrate the effectiveness of these projects, computer scientists deploy a kind of mishmash of drop the needle and Turing tests, where varying populations are asked to judge whether or not the music heard sounds like Bach. Put in a heuristic then, Bach becomes less a corporeal composer and more of a measure of musical aptitude. As computer scientists predict the applicability of their research, they routinely claim that their models can harmonize or compose any kind of music. One paper from the corpus set the algorithm loose on a collection of rock songs, creating a very odd mashup of the Lutheran chorale and 80s hair metal. If anyone wants to listen to that, please let me know, I can send it to you. But these training sets of chorales then move from being a test case and towards being a representation of knowledge that is utilized widely beyond subject experts in general communication. This is the phenomenon that Dylan Mulvin identifies as proxies, or the often hidden representations of the world that enable the production and dissemination of knowledge throughout society. Mulvin contends that proxies form a kind of knowledge infrastructure, where the utility is predicated on the erasure of the social, conditional, and contextual origins from which proxies emerge. The concealment of non-objectivity is a performance begun by experts and eventually transferred to individuals who labor to maintain the objectivity, applicability, and relevance of a given proxy. This labor also defines the limitations of what can or cannot be measured by the given affordances of the proxy itself. As capabilities enacted by proxies become applicable beyond their initial use cases, these proxies limit the possibilities afforded by technologies. Mulvin focuses primarily on visual culture and visual proxies within his monograph, but his assertions hold true for auditory culture as well. Considering the Bach chorale as a proxy allows us to recognize the encoding of what Lauren Kajikawa calls the possessive investment in classical music and Phil Ewell calls the white racial frame of music theory and the basic goal of artificial intelligence research, namely to prove musical intelligence. Before going further, it's important to understand that the term AI is a shorthand for a wide variety of computational systems known as artificial intelligence, yet it lacks any widespread technical definition. Although the fields of computer science and data analytics have tried to create what is dubbed general artificial intelligence, the most common iteration of AI is domain-specific. That is, a type of model that is trained for use in specific subjects, applications, and professions. At present, domain-specific AI is typically built through a methodology of machine learning, which is a computational technique wherein a desired output, y, is correlated to a known input of x. In the real world, however, such causal relationships are rare, and machine algorithms utilize correlation as a stand-in for causation. This is what allows machine learning programs to be considered, in the words of Matteo Pasquinelli, an instrument of knowledge or logical magnification that perceives patterns that are beyond the reach of the human mind. Machine learning identifies patterns amongst a sufficiently large data set, but these patterns do not inherently guarantee meaningful results. Offering random correlation as equivalent to causation is what Wendy Chun argues is the fundamental harm of machine learning, in that it makes the present and future coincide with a highly curated past. Louisa Moore goes further, arguing that the pernicious harms of computational decision-making resides in computational madness, or the reduction of multiple potentials into a singular output. Writing against claims of algorithmic hallucination or madness that are deployed to explain away undesirable algorithmic behavior, Moore notes that algorithms are defined by their extreme adherence to rational and systemic calculative processes, even as circumstances demand non-logical answers. When people demand rationality from algorithmic systems, they ignore how algorithms deploy unreason in order to generate outputs. Now, in turning to two case studies from the corpus of this research, Kamal Ebcioglu's chorale and Feynman Liang's Bach, we see examples of how the assumption of algorithmic rationality and madness become mapped onto musical subjects within Bach's music, being lent an epistemal status of universality that leaves no room for any madness or non-rationality within the outputted music. An outgrowth of Dr. Ebcioglu's 1986 dissertation, he describes his project as a rule-based expert system called Choral. First developed in the 1960s, and expert systems are an attempt to represent vast amounts of domain-specific knowledge that has been transferred from a human expert to a computer program. In this way, it does not represent an entirely abstracted form of pattern recognition. Rather, it relies on a programmer and human expert to put varying proportions of weight on certain rules or perspectives. This allows Ebcioglu to avoid absolute rules, such as those found in a treatise, which are not sufficient for producing beautiful music. Although Ebcioglu seems to indicate a frustration with the system of absolute musical rationality, he claims that this is in fact compositional talent that is inserted into rules as a mechanism for getting around choral's propensity for absolute rule adherence. In other words, he injects non-rational musical rules into a system, countering what he views as non-beautiful music that results from absolute musical rule adherence. This is an example of Moore's computational madness, where algorithmic tendencies are labeled as undesirable, and values like Ebcioglu's own musical tastes are added experimentally as a method of producing optimized outputs. The addition of human nature is the defining characteristic of expert-based systems, and Ebcioglu's dissertation devotes a significant portion of his attempts to reverse engineer Schenkerian analysis as a method of generating the appropriate musical conditions for a chorale. Though these encodings of musical taste or composition, Ebcioglu views the contribution of choral as its ability to represent a knowledge-based computational model of music, which could be easily modified to produce other genres of music. Ebcioglu gives no evidence for how such a project would proceed, but relies on the inherent ability of the chorale to represent and function as compositional knowledge in application to all other musical forms. And while he views choral as being successful, he notes that it does not sound sufficiently Bach-like. We will listen now to a harmonization done by choral of BWV 16. To my ears, at the very least, this does not sound nearly as bad as the initial Google example, yet Ebcioglu anticipates a future turn in computational composition and speculates that to improve this procedure towards a more austere style would go through the hand simulation of the algorithm on many chorales, which would lead to the discovery of new heuristics and perhaps new viewpoints. This process is likely to reveal profound secrets about the music of the masters. Predicting advancements in machine learning, Epchiolu suggests that with enough data, Coral could eventually converge on a perfectly imitatable Bach. This calculated Bach is based on the gradual elimination of computational madness through data refinement and echoes Pasquinelli's contention that machine learning programs detect patterns off limits to the human mind, in this case, the patterns of the music of the masters. Instead of relying on the limited comprehensions that mere humans can hope to analyze, Coral represents an original hypothesis that a musical rationality exists beyond absolute rules and is instead encoded in musical data. Further, musical rationality is calculable, or at least capable of being imitated by probabilistic weight, and can be deployed to produce good compositions. Yet, as we will see with the following example, even when a machine learning algorithm is given more autonomy, it does not inherently result in proof of musical mastery, despite what the author may claim. BachBot was a project developed by Feynman Liang originally as a part of his 2016 master's thesis at Cambridge University. Liang is careful to point out in publications that BachBot does not allow prior assumptions about music theory and structure to impact the design of the model. Unlike Epchiolu, Liang designed BachBot to train on data sets alone, thereby preventing the addition of human bias or domain-specific knowledge from being introduced to the program. This allows Liang to contend, that his model rediscovers and therefore proves musical theoretical concepts or musical rationality. This represents an assumption of algorithmic potential to prove rationality without engaging in histories and social causes of theoretical knowledge practices. The remainder of this music, then, is what I am calling musical madness, or the social and relational bits of musical practice that cannot be perceived by calculation. Musical madness is discarded in favor of the re-entrenchment of musical rationality modeled from these encoded patterns. The notion of resolution is important for examining Liang's assumptions regarding musical practice. Contemporary approaches to machine learning require a prerequisite practice of data hygiene to model development. In sanitizing data from Bach's chorale corpus, Liang removes all features beyond pitch and rhythm, identifying those as the only two musically neutral characteristics. As previously mentioned, Liang's goal for BachBot is to demonstrate the intelligence of the program by the rediscovery of music theoretical principles. Yet Liang seems to rather arbitrarily decide what constitutes a biased imposition of music theoretical conceptions. For instance, while Liang uses transpositional equivalency to increase the size of the training dataset, he does not mark this as a formal theoretical intervention. Contrastingly, Liang argues for the encodement of fermatas into the dataset, thereby allowing the model to more accurately perceive and experiment with phrase lengths, and argues that this only serves to add legibility to musical data. What exactly constitutes data hygiene in formal theoretical interventions is incredibly mercurial, and that claims to objectivity within data hygiene should be encountered within major reservations. As we have seen, the attractiveness of the algorithm is its ability to conjure rationality and calculability from what was previously marked uncalculable. Let's listen now to yet another example of a harmonization of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, this time by BachBot. I thought about having us all do our good sight reading exercise and singing along, but I thought I would spare you. So again, I really do love those 16th notes in that. But yet again, I don't know that Bach has been resurrected to harmonize Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Yet what is salient in the mind of Liang is that BachBot's music is indistinguishable from Bach's music according to the 2,336 participants who experimented with BachBot on its publicly available interface. According to Liang, 51% of the participants could not tell the difference between BachBot and actual Bach. Perhaps hardly far from convincing for us music scholars, Liang nevertheless claims that specific concept or computational analysis of the algorithm proves music theoretical concepts, such as the fact that the G sharp does not appear often in the key of C major, or that a dominant chord has a role in shaping the subsequent resolutions of chords near the ends of phrases. Far from illegible and incomprehensible, musical rationality seems rather banal in the plain light of day. To paraphrase musicologist Michael Markham's question about Bach reception history, what kind of Bach do computer scientists need? Or perhaps more accurately, what kind of Bach is created by computer scientists making programs that compose music? As one Google computer scientist claims about the nature of Bach's music, it has all the rules of how to write good harmony and melodies baked in. Although it is difficult to imagine what kind of music wouldn't have some self-contained rules of harmony or music embedded in it, this computer scientist unknowingly describes what Susan McClary calls the Pythagorean Bach. McClary's Pythagorean Bach demonstrates a view of composition that is non-social, metaphysical, universal, and based on a self-contained order. This viewpoint of composition appears as a necessary precursor to the deployment of computational programs that seek to calculate so-called correct composition. As they quantize musical reason, then, these computer scientists disregard the corollary of musical reason, musical madness, and the creative potential of probing musical reason's borderlands. This mirrors McClary's concern that music's social and cultural influences are lost in favor of a Pythagorean rational order. Following McClary, then, we can recognize that music making does not occur because of inherent logic or rational processes, even as reason is technologically identified as a skewing of a creative musical madness, regressing musical practice to a calculated normative form of musical reason. I would like to go back and listen to an additional 3 harmonizations done by Google Bach's project, all right in a row, just a few days ago. As we can hear, none of these 4 harmonizations are the same, yet the inputted soprano line did not change. Under a musically rational perspective of computational composition, this should not be possible, and yet it does exist. This tension is the madness of computation, the expectation that the messy, incongruous, and relational world that we inhabit can be quantized into computational forms. To quote Louisa Moore one more final time, the manifestation of a moment of apparent madness in an algorithm's actions become necessarily also a moment when the algorithm gives an account of its form of reason. The refutation of singular output displayed in a plurality of Bach harmonizations is a resultant byproduct of the nature of algorithmic computation, that it attempts to explore and seek new outputs. It is only when outputs are labeled non-normative and normative until an arbitrary threshold of satisfaction is reached, thereby constituting a kind of manufactured reason based on computational madness. So how then do we deal with this music? I propose that the Disco Network's conception of techno-skepticism, or the refusal to align concretely with a positive or negative view of technology, is incredibly useful. While this may sound like a classic both sides conclusion, and perhaps to some extent it is, the Disco Network seeks to create an ability to hold the dual nature of technology and its ability to simultaneously speak to its potentials and its limitations for individual human actors. As I continue to pursue this research, I find myself wondering what a techno-skeptical perspective of musicological analysis might look like. A techno-skeptical perspective on the project of Bach-like computational composition allows a viewpoint that tries to hold the benefit that this technology does not steal music and creative labor from unconsenting artists, and the consequence of being left out of the data set as new forms of measurement are being encoded. The benefit of giving opportunities to point out what happens when musical madness is left out of music making, and the consequences of reifying canonical composers of Western art music. I'd like to contend that what is left out in the process of quantizing and calculating music is musical madness. The question now is whether or not we choose to listen for it. Thank you very much.
We have time for a few questions.
I think so wonderful presentation. I really appreciated the discussion of musical madness in the algorithmic examples. I'm curious about moments of madness in Bach's actual chorales. Are there any, and are they similar to the types of madness that the algorithms tend to reproduce? Maybe like when Bach harmonizes some of those weird modal melodies, there's moments of harmonic irrationality.
So thank you for that question. I really appreciate it, Tikla. And you bring up a very interesting point, which is that these computer scientists do call Bach like bad sometimes. Like they very specifically say that some of his music does not follow the rules and should be disregarded. Which is a little bit hard to reckon with, like also the deification of the composer. So I think there is somewhat, like to an extent, that like Bach's musical madness is being like recognized by like these computer scientists, and to the extent that it mirrors or displays some of the computational madness of the algorithm itself. I think back to the first Bach example. I don't have any evidence for this, but I suspect that the final like little half note, eighth notes at the end are a result of a lot of people inputting the Beethoven Fürlies, right? Like, I think that's where that comes from. I don't necessarily have any proof of that, but the Bach doodle holds and maintains all of the melodies that were inputted by humans and has published that data set publicly. So I believe that there's some kind of layering that goes on there.
Thank you so much.
Now time for maybe one or two more questions.
This is a really cool project. One thing with the little eighth note at the end, I think it's also because they're looping on the website, right? So it's not actually thinking about it as an ending, it's like this perpetual loop. I wonder how you've been in your project, how you've been negotiating the difference between how people talk about their algorithms and versus what they might really think about their algorithms, because they're often selling it to an often purchasing public, right? Or they're trying to gas up their own project. And so I wonder, like I'm thinking about how David Cope would say, right? How I'm totally like we're reviving Bach, but like right? And so I guess I'm wondering what about that distance.
Thank you for that question, and I appreciate you bringing it up. One of the things that I didn't get to put in here was David Cope. It was just too big of a figure to just try and fit into 20 minutes. Yes, you bring up a really interesting point about the marketing of these algorithms. One of the things that I think is important to note is that none of these algorithms are commercially viable. Like when Google produced its algorithm, or the doodle, that was done to market its ability to distribute computational tasks to millions of machines. That was the purpose of the doodle. The other, Epchiolu and Liang's algorithms don't have any commercial viability. Liang has withdrawn BachBot. It no longer exists on the internet. He now works, from all that I can tell, as a private actor, not doing anything related to Bach. Epchiolu went on to do other research, again, not related to Bach in any meaningful way. So I don't necessarily know that there is like this kind of fiscal provability, or this an ability to profit off the Bach algorithms, which makes me think about it primarily as like this notion of how do we prove that artificial intelligence is actual research? How do we use different projects as a way of legitimizing the discipline and allowing it to find more avenues of making intelligence?
All right.
Yeah.
Let's
All right. Our next speaker this morning is Matthew Blackmar. You look Matthew is Assistant Professor of Musicology at Indiana University. His research orbits the figure of the musical amateur, engaging in contemporary digital practice, modern recording engineering, and sound design in 19th century print cultures. His debut book project examines the musical prehistory of the AI term prismatically refracted through hip-hop culture, data science, and copyright law. Let's welcome Matthew.
Good morning. Thank you for bearing with the delay there. And thank you to Professor Drott and our co-panelists. I would like to begin this morning by asking the question, what's in a word? One answer, a rich network of associative meanings. Words imply or summon to mind other words. In discourse as in memory, new words act as palimpsests. Others' words become our own, once removed. Words express ideas which reside in the public domain. Strings of words can be copyrighted. Ideas cannot be. In U.S. copyright law, a major criterion for a fair use exception is that it be transformative. New words transform old ones. A paraphrase of another's words and a send-up thereof are each protected forms of speech. The question of what makes a use transformative, however, is a vexed one, subject to the vagaries of case law. In U.S. copyright jurisprudence, it has become common to construe digital systems for mechanically copying information as vehicles for transformative use. Yet today, I wish to instead follow U.S. Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan in recognizing that the original impetus for U.S. copyright was to foster creativity, in the words of the U.S. Constitution, to promote the progress of both art and science. And there I have Kagan's palimpsest on the language from the Constitution, and I've added my italics, the both and. I thus propose that U.S. jurisprudence has of late not only favored the progress of science over art, but that it has thereby favored corporate interests over those of individual artists. Ironically, copyright law itself now hangs in the balance. Will Congress amend copyright statutes to mimic the EU's fair use exception for text and data mining, or TDM? Or will U.S. jurists continue to expand fair use to accommodate large language models, or LLMs, image compositors such as DALL-E, and audio generators such as Suno and Udio? The register of my analysis today is necessarily speculative. It seems implausible that U.S. legislators, now more than ever as the shutdown continues, will reach a bipartisan consensus to rewrite the copyright code to accommodate TDM. Occam's razor suggests instead that this work will fall to jurists. I thus want to offer a plea to jurists, like those who decide RIAA versus Suno, the pending decision, that they follow Justice Kagan's dissent in Warhol versus Goldsmith from 2023, in which she objects to the valorization of commercial use in fair use jurisprudence. And I propose that they should instead recognize that transformative artistic use is in fact more apt for the pressing matter of distinguishing AI from human authorship. So briefly, let me just gloss Warhol versus Goldsmith for you. Justice Sotomayor's decision arguably privileges the fourth factor in fair use, whether the allegedly infringing work competes in the marketplace with the original, over the first factor, whether the allegedly infringing work is transformative. So transformative artistic expression is a human input into this conversation. Now, two recent cases regarding transformative artistic use, one in the US and one in the EU, are particularly relevant. On the one hand is a landmark 2016 decision by the US Ninth Circuit on minimal sampling, and on the other hand is a late-breaking decision by the Court of Justice of the European Union, or the CJEU, on pastiche. The former concerns Madonna's use of a 0.23 second horn sample in her 1990 hit Vogue. The latter concerns Pelham GmbH's use of a 2-second loop from Kraftwerk's 1977 Metall auf Metall. Together, they summon urgent questions regarding how legal constructions of authorship and agency interact with the principle of transformation. Today, I want to pose two such questions that I believe jurists will need to answer to reconcile these disparate legal precedents. First, to what extent do AI training models borrow fragments of copyrighted music? And second, to what extent do they reassemble these borrowings in the music they generate? So at issue is terminological precision. When even developers of generative AI systems themselves strain to explain how they work, Jurists are unlikely to be able to render opinions that wield the technical nomenclature familiar only to experts in software engineering. They will instead grasp at metaphors and analogies, each of which risk reducing or distorting the processes they describe. To gesture toward but a handful of examples, is a gustatory metaphor apt? Do models ingest training data? And now it's become popular to speak of them regurgitating it. Or is an agricultural frame of reference more useful? That is to say, is scraping the web tantamount to harvesting data? Is the agricultural itself the best industrial context for understanding AI? Or is the mineral, for instance, the EU's phrase text and data mining, or TDM? Or are each misplaced efforts to represent what are really probabilistic systems of heuristics, whereby the path to an output is more akin to that of a ball proceeding through a pinball machine's tuned sets of weights and measures, permitted to pass through some thresholds while being rejected by others? Here, the ball's teleological and deterministic path is itself misleading. The mechanisms of code that generate AI outputs are decidedly non-linear. One might instead productively take up the analogy of the brain, encoded in the term neural network. This September, while conducting ethnographic field work in South Korea, I spoke with an academic computer scientist who explained to me that the best way to understand resemblances between an audio generator's outputs and its training data, often sound recordings under copyright, is the model of associative memory. So memories, per this informant, are distributed representations that efficiently allocate fragments of a composite through systems of storage and recall spanning neurons. Memory is thus robust, resilient to injury and illness. Even a damaged brain does not lose its capacity to recall distinct memories, but rather the associative networks that permit recollection across distributed representations themselves atrophy, introducing noise to the signal. So that brings me to the crucial point of this talk, and one to which I'll return by way of conclusion. That is that generative AI systems recall their inputs only partially. For our part, we might recall Bright Tunes Music versus Harrisongs, 1976, in which George Harrison's My Sweet Lord was deemed subconscious plagiarism of a copyrighted composition. Ronnie Mac's 1963 hit for the Chiffons, He's So Fine. In 2013, Oliver Sacks offered a clinical corrective. Harrison's case was not one of plagiarism per se, which implies intent to deceive, but rather of cryptomnesia, the return of a forgotten memory such that it appears novel. Cryptomnesia is perhaps the best metaphor for the accidental plagiarism perpetrated by audio generators, when the outputs of a stochastic process putatively come to exceed the threshold of substantial similarity with copyrighted works. And I think I figured out this weekend, after hearing some magnificent research on copyright and AI, that I'd like to call this phenomenon stochastic similarity. So we'll throw that onto the whiteboard as an idea here. So stochastic similarity, substantial similarity achieved through random statistical processes. Now, the questions remain. To what extent do AI training models borrow audio, copyrighted audio? And to what extent do they reassemble such borrowings in the music they generate? Text and data mining systems are predicated on temporary copying and caching of data, a statutory fair use per the EU copyright directive, and one protected by precedent in US case law. But are audio generators, in fact, text and data mining systems? In the context of the EU's copyright directive, computer scientist Sebastian Stober intervenes by reading the engineering literature and the EU statutes to argue that TDM and Gen AI operate by distinct logics and differ significantly in how they actually work in technical terms. As such, he concludes the fair use exception for TDM should not apply to audio generators. Specifically, Stober identifies 5 criteria for distinguishing generative systems from TDM. The most pertinent to copyright law is the fact that AI systems are generative. By approximating the data distribution of their inputs, they produce more of the same. TDM, by contrast, is extractive, designed to recognize and refine interesting patterns into useful knowledge. So where TDM for Stober is about creating value out of data by refining or enriching it, the outputs of audio generators instead compete in the marketplace with their inputs. While such a distinction between TDM and generative AI might be a legal fiction, it underscores the need for U.S. jurists to follow Justice Kagan in emphasizing artistic transformation over commercial use. Perhaps, indeed, an analogy to music sampling is apt. Are the workings of audio generators akin to those of sample-based beat makers, albeit on a massive automated scale? One criterion for identifying a transformative use is the substantiality of the material borrowed. Here, jurists in cases like RIAA versus Suno might look to the precedent of the aforementioned Madonna dispute, VMG Sol Sol versus Chacon, 2016, which rehabilitated the de minimis doctrine in recorded sampling. So in copyright law, the de minimis doctrine, or the praetor does not concern himself with trifles, concedes thresholds for insubstantial borrowing. Recognizing that Newton versus Diamond 2004 established that a 6-second sample that recurs 40 times could be insubstantial, Madonna prevailed in VMG Sol Sol, invoking the fair use defense of her only 0.23-second horn stab that occurs intermittently throughout Vogue. But just how much of an audio file is copied in harvesting AI training data? To answer this question entails clarifying how AI audio generators go about aggregating their inputs. Where the analogy to associative memory in the brain helps us to understand the relationship between input and output in a neural network, the cognitive metaphor breaks down when confronted by analogy to perception. AI audio generators do not listen to music. Rather, they encode audio via distributed representations. Instead of sampling by cutting, copying, and patterning morsels of audio, they represent bits and pieces of it via code that is written into memory in a manner that makes it impossible to sum it up a composite input on demand. That is to say, their memory is profoundly lossy. The process undertaken by audio generators is not analogous to facsimile copying, like taking a photograph or quoting a text, but more akin to translating an archive, leaving no remainder once the borrowed materials are returned. Sampling and encoding are extractive in that each entails processing or refining raw material into a useful form, and here I differ with Stober. AI appears predicated in the first instance on text and data mining. So after scraping training data, AI undertakes pattern recognition, searching for correlations and resemblances. And while both perceptual systems and AI recognize patterns, cognition cannot be reduced to a statistical analysis. Per Thaler v. Perlmutter, human authorship is the bedrock of copyright. The distinction between sampling and training a model on borrowed data is thus a matter of kind, not of degree. Recognizing that text and data mining is now protected by EU statute, one might ask to what extent is musical sampling an appropriate analogy there? One might look to Pelham GmbH versus Ralph Hutter and Florian Schneider-Estleben. Here, by contrast with the de minimis rulings in Newton versus Diamond and VMG Sol Sol versus Chacon, the looped 2-second Kraftwerk sample in the song Nur Mir, performed by the singer Sabrina Settler, was in this case deemed to be unrecognizable to the ear. To wit, if an audio pastiche leaves no audible remainder of its borrowing, it should be understood as a copyright exception. It should by now be clear that legal jurisdictions and precedents conflict and contradict each other across the human-machine divide. On the one hand, the audibility test of Pelham GmbH suggests that if outputs are perceived to be dissimilar enough from their inputs, no infringement has occurred, regardless of whether measurable traces of the sources are present in the outputs. On the other hand, as AI copyright activist Ed Newton-Rex has shown, audio generators like Suno are predisposed to produce outputs that human listeners readily associated with copyrighted inputs. The irony is that these systems know not what they do. Mechanically, they cannot recall their inputs, but nevertheless appear by the standard of substantial similarity to stochastically break the law. If one construes TDM copying and caching to be a fair use, and to reiterate, there's both a basis in EU statute and US precedent from which to do so, then firms like Suno have essentially created what some have called IP laundering machines. While Thaler v. Perlmutter suggests that outputs themselves cannot be copyrighted, this does not mean that they cannot be monetized. By the time a copyright dispute is filed, Suno will already have collected its fee via its subscription model. A further irony is that by bolstering the human-machine divide in decisions like Thaler, jurists inadvertently empower AI firms. Mechanical reproduction has now been deemed a fair use, while representation by hand, like the work of sample-based beat makers, still answers to the standard of substantial similarity. And indeed, the bright line ruling in Bridgeport versus Dimension Films that says, if you must sample, get a license. So, what is to be done? I conclude that jurists should, first, privilege artistic transformation over new commercial uses, recognizing that generative AI systems both produce outputs that compete in the market with their inputs and fall dramatically short of artistically recontextualizing them, instead producing more of the same through regression toward the mean. I think jurists should censure Pseudo, Udio, and other audio generator firms for borrowing trading data without permission or license, regardless of substantial similarity between outputs and inputs. And finally, I would propose that jurists should enhance fair use exceptions for human-made works by individual artists like Madonna and Sabrina Settler. Now, items 1 and 3 are viable, but precedent suggests that item 2 is a long shot at best. Nevertheless, to illustrate what is at stake with my three-pronged agenda, I have prepared a test of Suno's audio generator by means of prompt engineering. Now, while Suno performs impressively when tasked with producing a pop song with genres as frames of reference, so I want a coloratura soprano singing to a hip-hop beat, it stumbles when prompted to produce a mashup, something that explicitly juxtaposes the styles of two or more recognized artists, a la Greg Gillis or Girl Talk. So you see here in the circled prompt window or field, I've asked Suno to make a mashup, any mashup. And I got the message, couldn't generate that. Please try rephrasing with more specific details or using a different approach. Now it gets more interesting when I asked it make a mashup of a Taylor Swift song and a a Jackson 5 song. It said I cannot generate something with the keyword Taylor. So you see a self-policing mechanism built into to try to militate against copyright infringement. What I got when I asked for my mashup was a bizarre song about dreaming big in the city, Skyline Dreams, which I want to share with you. So let's listen. And as you listen, ask yourself what on earth it is being mashed up here, because you'll see that in each of the keywords for each of the outputs, mashup is present. See if you can hear the mashup in Skyline Dreams.
City lights, made by fireflies, underneath the velvet sky. Dreams that tall, touching cloud, whispered loud, hearts unbound.
spare you anymore. But now, by way of conclusion briefly, a mashup is not only substantially similar with the works that it juxtaposes, it is unmistakably built from each. Its musical rhetoric depends upon the power of quotation and allusion, each of which are known fair use exceptions. What makes for an elegant mashup is the parsimonious relationship of the new work to its reference, the see what I did there bravura of virtuosic combinatoriality. Using prompt engineering to eliminate the immediate limits of Suno's musicality helps one to see that human creativity adds value to fair use exceptions, underscoring Justice Kagan's point that a Warhol representation of a photograph is not tantamount to an Instagram filter, but rather contains a world of interpretive and perceptual acuity unto itself. So as we await the decision of RIA versus Suno, we would all do well to not only read Kagan's 2023 dissent, but to mark her words. Thank you.
All right, we have some time for questions.
Hello, my name's Andrew. This was a phenomenal talk, and I'm always looking for legal precedent to come to for this kind of thing. I just had a comment about the word cryptomnesia, which I really like, and it's also a weird get around of copyright. But something that I wonder if you looked into is another case where it's Randy Newman writing for Monsters Inc. It is note for note a New Orleans tune called Old Rockin' Chair, and which is in public use as far as a melody, I believe, but it is, when I heard Rockin' Chair years later, I was like, this is that Monsters Inc. song. That's weird, and I didn't have the words for it, and it might just be another avenue for you to look to and point to. So.
That's great. Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, of course, Randy has the few lawyers to point.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there would be any precedent there.
Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
So Matt, I don't know that I have a question that could possibly, people put questions because you're like, what did you think of this? I didn't thought of everything. I can follow on with what just came up from Andrew, in that very famously, this is what Paul McCartney thought when he wrote Yesterday, right? He reports being convinced that it must be a song that he heard, but just didn't remember. And he said he stressed for about a week trying to remember what the song was until he realized he actually heard it. So musicians appear to be aware of this, and so I don't know, that's just a tidbit. I'm going to ask an intentionally sort of dumb, slightly self-lacerating question. I actually don't understand what was funny about the Suno output, and everybody laughed. And so this is a general question, and you can come up. Why did you find that funny? I mean, I think you were trying to find it funny because we're all pretty ambivalent about Suno artists, but I honestly didn't get it. So anybody who can explain to me what was funny or what's funny to you about it, I would love to know.
That's a great question. I didn't necessarily mean for it to be a gag.
No, I'm not saying I thought it was awesome,
Yeah.
but I think there was a moment where I didn't get it.
Oh, yeah. Well, I welcome anyone who wants to share why they found it funny, but I would just say it's uncanny. Maybe it's not funny. Maybe that's something deadly serious. I don't know.
That's the great thing. So it was kind of nervous laughter.
I wonder. What does the room say?
Yeah.
I thought it was funny.
Explain.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was, I don't want to take too much time away, but just to be brief, I thought it was funny because what it made me think is that, in a way, you could see this as like an auto-critique of the sort of because it is so convincing. Like, it actually did work as a pop song, and so it's like, well, this is the kind of critique of the contemporary pop music industry. And I thought that was fun.
Oh, okay. So that's another kind of lecture, sort of like knowing lecture, like, oh yeah, it really is all just one. Okay, yeah, because I was wondering, there was a moment where AI screwed up and did something more like, fucking dumb. Okay, let's more. Wow, that was so
I also think there was one example of text that just like didn't make sense, like something like electric parade or something kind of crazy.
Oh, yes, okay, the lyrics were dumb.
But for the sake of time, I think we have at least one more question, so Matt, you want to come up to the mic.
Thank you for this. Sorry, I lost my voice. Matt Mendes, Denver. Thank you for this. That's tremendous. I just love the way that you're like really digging into case law and giving us new concepts to think with. I wanted to just kind of open a question. I wanted to give you a chance to like say more about. So towards the end, you kind of turned towards the question of like what is to be done, policy infrastructure as it were. And like when you go into law school spaces, this is kind of what copyright lawyers. That's kind of what they're really interested in, copyright economics. And my question is kind of like, how do you think about that? And how do you come about kind of formulating those prescriptions? What do you think of the role of the musicologists or those whether analysts or whatever you might think there's like where do you see the relationship between kind of that kind of first to done question and kind of where is the relation? That's an open question that I wanted to just
Great, thank you for that. That's a really interesting question. This is part of an ongoing conversation that I'm having with my friends and colleagues about interdisciplinary inquiry in musicology, and how we. I'm endeavoring to locate myself at the Venn diagram between information technology, legal studies, or information studies, legal studies, and musicology. But the problem is that I probably should get a JD and a computer science degree if I really want to. I wish I had the benefit of having been a computer science major and gone to law school. Then I would be the perfect musicologist for this. But for now, it's an imperfect effort to try to kind of armchair quarterback. I am prescribing what the U.S. Supreme Court should do. I guess that's a little grandiose, but I feel strongly that all of my research seems to point to the idea that precedent has favored Silicon Valley corporations over individuals in adjudicating fair use. And so I think I could distill all of this to just this one prescription. That is to attend to case law pertaining to music copyright and not decide RIAA versus Suno purely on the basis of case law pertaining to information technology. So that is a musicological intervention, right? I mean, that is to say, what about what humans do in the music? So thank you.
All right, let's thank you, Matthew. All right, so our final speaker this morning on the panel is Kelly Hoppenjans. She's a fifth-year PhD candidate in musicology at the University of Michigan, researching 21st century pop music, voice, technology, identity, and social media. She's previously presented at SAM, SEM, IASPM, and AMS, and won the David Sanchek Student Paper Prize for her presentation at IASPM 2025. Congratulations. Her dissertation focuses on voice transforming technology in pop music and the way artists explore their humanity, agency, and identity through these sound altering mediums. And her paper title today is What is a Voice Worth? Voice Actors and AI Voice Labor Under Techno-Capitalism. So let's welcome Kelly.
Thanks so much to all of you and to Eric and the fellow panel. All these papers have been wonderful. I also want to say at the top that I actually have a co-writer on this paper, Michael Nayabare, who is an information science PhD student, also at University of Michigan. Works a lot with artist communities and AI. He's not able to be here today, but I will relay any feedback that y'all have to him as well. So, when ChatGPT released their version 4.0 in May 2024, They included several new voices that users could select to converse with the popular chatbot in voice mode. Many noticed suspicious similarities between one of the voice options, called Sky, and actor Scarlett Johansson's voice. Johansson famously voiced a sentient chatbot in the 2013 sci-fi movie Her, and had turned down multiple offers from OpenAI to lend her voice to their suite of AI personalities leading up to the launch of Sky. And this clip compares a demo of the Sky voice and Johansson's performance in Her to demonstrate some of those similarities.
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. How about you? I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. How about you?
OpenAI had demonstrated by this point their ability to create convincing voice clones with only a 15-second recording of a person's voice, a feat which many competitor companies likewise offer for free or a nominal fee. Though OpenAI denies any intention to imitate Johansson or use of her voice to train their model without her consent, they did swiftly remove Sky from their offerings in order to avoid a lawsuit. I do not aim to litigate whether OpenAI actually trained Sky on recordings of Scarlett Johansson's voice without her knowledge or consent. Since both the voice and the lawsuit were dropped, we really can't know. Rather, the fact that the tech giant could have easily done so speaks to a shift in how voices are conceptualized that has emerged from AI and other tech companies' business practices. AI companies who rely on voice to provide seamless customer experience and humanize their futuristic chatbots treat voice as data. Much like how, as Eric Drott explains, Spotify and other music streamers approach music as data to be collected and exploited for profit, voices under this logic become both commodities that can be bought and sold, as well as labor that companies can extract from workers to continuously labor on their own for a lower cost than hiring vocalists. This paper explores this shift to the treatment of voice as data and its implications for voice actors' work, value, and livelihoods through several case studies of AI voice misuse. In order to ascertain how professional vocalists' work and livelihoods have been affected by this development, information scientist Michael Nayabare and I conducted a survey of 11 vocalists and voice actors based in cities across the US and held follow-up interviews with 5 of those survey participants. 2 more are coming. For the sake of time, I focus on voice actors and speech clones today, but our participants often had experience with both speech and musical clones. I'm happy to speak to both in the Q&A as well. Michael and I argue that allowing tech companies to consider voices as data creates a landscape where voices are commodified and devalued, and we advocate for a framework of fair compensation for vocalists, transparency from tech companies, and enshrining control of voice use with the vocalists from whom they emanate. These assurances can help ensure a sustainable voice work ecosystem in the AI age. The most immediate predecessors of today's AI voice clones are the voice assistants that proliferated in the 2010s. Apple's Siri, whose default voice is a friendly female American voice, was introduced with iOS 5 in 2011, and Amazon's Alexa and Microsoft's Cortana followed in 2014. These voice assistants, like most AI voice clones intended for speech, are created from one person's voice, which requires hours of recordings of thousands of words and/or phoneme combinations. While Siri has always been called AI, and has always been AI, its actual methods have changed over the years. It began with machine learning, and then added deep learning, neural networks, and most recently, in 2024, a large language model with subsequent updates, revealing the plasticity and slipperiness of the term AI. These developments have improved the sound. What was once a somewhat stilted model of a voice is now nearly indistinguishable from its source. I'll give you a hopefully by now familiar example.
For example, this is a clone of my voice made with popular AI voice company 11 Labs.
Could have had her give the presentation. The moment in which these voice assistants first surfaced in the 2010s is marked by the rise of surveillance capitalism, where companies collect and monetize customers' data en masse, and techno-capitalism, which Luis Suarez Villa identifies as a system of corporatized technological dominance predicated on treating creativity as an extractable commodity. Marx's concept of alienation, where capitalist industry separates labors from both their literal products and the process of making them through factory mechanization, finds a contemporary analog in these voices, which are created using voice actors who are then physically separated from their voices, which can continue to labor for tech companies. The question of who owns a voice when it can be made into AI and made to say virtually anything is paramount, as these companies technically own the voices of their assistants and can often buy, sell, and license them as they wish. Because of this alienation, Siri's original default voice was made without the knowledge of the vocalist Susan Bennett, let alone compensation. Bennett had been working for years as a voice actor in Atlanta when she was hired in 2005 for an interactive voice response company called Scansoft to record nonsensical phrases aimed at capturing all of the sound combinations in the English language. Bennett was never contacted by Scansoft about selling the voice clone they created, nor by Apple about using it for the voice of Siri. Instead, in 2011, a friend who had purchased an iPhone notified her that they recognized Bennett's voice as the soon-to-be ubiquitous voice assistant. She has said that, quote, "I was paid for the gig through Scansoft, but because Apple had bought the recordings from Scansoft, I never got a penny or any recognition from Apple." She connected with others whose voices had been purchased and used for the British and Australian versions of Siri, that original release, and found that they had had the exact same experience. Voice actor, musician, and interview participant Helena Hallberg went through a similar situation. She was hired in 2020 through a company called Speech Ocean to provide voice recordings that she later learned were to create Microsoft Switzerland's version of their voice assistant, Cortana. Hallberg, who is from Switzerland but was based in New York City at the time, was paid $3,000 for this work, which was a boon to her in the midst of the pandemic as other gigs had dried up. She then discovered in 2024 that Microsoft was selling her voice clone, which they called Lenny at that point, on their platform through their Azure AI voice service, as well as to other companies like Narrakeet, where her voice was called Heidi. And this is from Narrakeet's website, how they advertise Heidi.
Hallo, ich heiße Heidi. Die Stadt Zürich liegt im östlichen Schweizer Mittelland an der Limmat am Ausfluss des Zürichsees.
Hallberg found out that Microsoft had licensed her voice for commercial use from friends who sent her recordings they took of tram announcements, commercials, and songs where they recognized her voice. Hallberg feels there should be a way to track uses of her voice and condemns the use of overreaching and overly complex contracts for gig work, as well as secrecy from companies as to what and whom the work is for. As for the ownership and control of her voice, Hallberg laments that because Microsoft owns her clone and continues to profit from it, quote, "I sold my voice for $3,000. Like songwriting, production, and much other musical and sonic labor, voice work has long functioned primarily as a gig economy, where workers are not salaried employees, but instead hired on a gig-by-gig basis. In theory, gig work allows people to set their own rates and to only accept the work they want to take. In practice, gig workers often have to set their prices based on what people will pay them, not necessarily what they deserve, and to take the gigs they can get. In tech, critics have been raising alarm bells for years about the growing prominence of gig work in companies like Uber and Amazon, which can use loopholes in gig-based contracts to pay employees less and avoid offering benefits like healthcare, while appearing to offer them the freedom to make their own schedule and make more money. In addition to this trend, a branch of tech gig work called ghost work has arisen in roughly the past decade. This is hidden labor performed by humans, like data labeling and content moderating, that enables AI to perform its functions. This type of work is paid very little, even mere cents, for each task performed. Mechanical Turk from Amazon was like this. The gig economy of AI voice work, then, has inherited many of the existing issues in the voice and tech industries and amplified them. Voice work, which has long been precarious and demand-based, meets ghost work, where laborers perform tasks for low pay that stand to make tech companies millions, even billions of dollars. This combination of gig work and automated alienation presents an existential threat to voice professionals, that their voices, once copied into an AI clone, can be made to work and create profit for whoever owns the clone. Helena Hallberg pointed out that on voice actor gig work websites like voices.com, which you see here, and voice123.com, many of the gigs she has begun seeing appear to be asking for voice actors to train AI models without saying AI. Instead, using euphemisms like text-to-speech, abbreviated here as TTS, research project, or internal research. She can tell by these euphemisms, the low pay, and the high amount of word counts, that it's likely for AI, because these models work best with copious combinations of words. Companies may be reluctant to call their products AI in these listings because many voice actors have justified concerns about doing AI voice work, like losing control of their voices and their livelihoods. As Hallberg points out, quote, they legit try to offer you $300 for 45,000 words. So the dystopian perspective of you're basically training your own replacement for peanuts, that's a hard pill to swallow. In addition to this, because recordings of many voice actors' voices are publicly available through the work they've done, people and companies can make their own clones of others' voices without their knowledge and profit from them on sites like Lalals and 11 Labs. Lalals, which you see here, text-to-speech generator, allows users to create speech in their chosen voice, including generic ones like TikTok male voice and news reporter, as well as celebrities like David Attenborough, Theo Von, and Mr. Beast, all of whom likely did not give their consent to be cloned on the site. David Attenborough has been particularly vocal about hating this. Eric Holloway, a singer, voice actor, and interview participant, shared with us that he learned through a voice actor friend that a clone had been made of his voice on a site like this one, listed under his name and with his picture, without his knowledge and without compensation. He teamed up with a lawyer, but the site took down the clone before he needed to take legal action. Hallberg has taken to social media to tell her story in hopes that she might prevent someone else from taking an exploitative work deal and to advocate for better protections for gig workers and personal data. In one of her TikToks, Hallberg talks about a necessary question that arises out of the treatment of voice as data. What is a voice worth?
But I think it's an incredibly important discussion that we need to have. We need to protect people's voices, people's IP, our voice is like a limb. So we need to have that discussion. We need to talk about what a voice is worth in the world of AI.
To vocalists, voices are often deeply personal, a part of their body like a limb, an expression of their identity, a vehicle to communicate their thoughts, and of course, a main source of income. To AI companies, voices are valuable as commodities and cheap labor, as we have seen. Yet they do serve an important role for these companies that doesn't align with their relegation to simple data points. Tech companies use voice clones to familiarize and humanize their futuristic products to wary or technology-averse customers. They often rely on voices' strong association with identity, playing on stereotypical roles based in gender and race, as well as science fiction imaginaries, which present futuristic AI characters with personalities and pathos to perform this familiarization with uncanny technology. Despite the value this clearly brings their companies in terms of customer adoption and public image, large tech companies are still committed to undermining the exchange value of voice work and threatening the livelihoods of the voice actors on whom they rely. 2010's voice assistants like Siri and Cortana, as well as more recent AI clones like ChatGPT's voice mode agents, often rely on societal stereotypes about who might perform an assistant role and how they might sound. Tao Fan argues that Siri's default voice, from Susan Bennett, uses gender to play on the association between administrative work and women, and that Apple uses voice and personality to give her materiality and tangibility as a character. Apple characterizes her role as servile, there to assist the user with whatever they need and answer any question, and they give her a chipper female voice to make her feel more real. Revealingly, Apple is committed to erasing the importance of gendered roles in Siri's formation by coding her to say that she doesn't have a gender when asked, which you can see one response there. Fawn collected some of the responses Siri has given over the years to the question, do you have a gender, which you can see here. And one directly mentions voice, suggesting that Apple is aware of the associations between Siri's feminine voice and administrative assistant work, yet wants to resist any implication that they might be playing on stereotypical gender roles by casting Siri as agender. Fawn also points out a related disappearing act of race in these voice assistants, focusing on Amazon's Alexa, her place in the home, and the history of domestic labor performed by women of color. 2010's voice assistants are all intended to sound white, not particularly to index whiteness itself, but rather to play on whiteness as universal in tech spaces and erase racialized connections to women of color, especially considering the servile nature of voice assistants. Today's chatbot voices, including Siri, are generally more diverse than the cheery white women of the 2010s, yet for those intended to assist with administrative tasks, they share a similar upbeat, servile tone. They're given names like Spruce and Breeze that aren't generally associated with a gender, and while they have brief personality descriptions that vary in terms of formality, they are pleasant, professional, and happy to help, and these are some of ChatGPT's voice assistants.
Hey, it's great to meet you. How's your day going? I'm really looking forward to working on some cool stuff together.
Hello, it's lovely to meet you. If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to let me know. I'm here to help.
Hey, how's it going? I'm looking forward to working together.
Let's figure out where to start.
While they have expanded their offerings from previous chatbots, ChatGPT's goal in giving them voice remains the same: to humanize them, making them friendly, reassuring, and easy to interact with for tech-averse users. While the tones we've heard are largely professional, when Sky, the ChatGPT model similar to Scarlett Johansson, was removed, many users commented on the flirty tone of the voice, with some saying they would miss it more because of this tone. Part of the flirtiness of Sky came from her association with Johansson's character from Her, an AI assistant who falls in love and has a romantic relationship with her user, played by Joaquin Phoenix. Sam Altman of ChatGPT, like other tech CEOs, deliberately referenced this beloved sci-fi character in order to humanize ChatGPT's models. Johansson has said that when Altman approached her about contributing her voice before she turned him down, he pitched it as a way to make their AI voices comforting to people wary of AI technology. Aside from courting Johansson as a voice actor, Altman has spoken about how prophetic and inspiring he finds the film Her, and even tweeted the single word Her on the day ChatGPT released their voice mode update. Similar humanizing elements from sci-fi went into the creation of Cortana, who is named after an AI character in the video game Halo, and Siri, who, when asked what is the meaning of life, will often respond 42. And those who know, that's a reference to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Steve Jobs was apparently a big fan. AI characters in science fiction are often portrayed with very human-like characteristics, like free will, inner emotional lives, and critical thinking skills that current AI bots simply do not possess. Tech moguls like Jobs and Altman, who deliberately reference these characters, hope to imbue their AI offerings with similar charm, and they do so, in large part, through personality and voice. As part of our survey and interviews, Michael and I asked participants what their concerns regarding AI were, how AI was already affecting their work, and what changes they wanted to see to create an equitable voice work ecosystem in the AI age. Through their responses, we devised a framework of compensation, transparency, and control that can guide AI companies towards ethical practices. As we've seen, fair compensation is a key issue for vocalists. When asked what concerned them most about AI in their field, 10 of the 11 vocalists surveyed chose devaluation of human creativity, 8 chose loss of revenue opportunities, and 6 chose lack of proper compensation. Many highlighted payment structures like royalties and licensing as important to their vision of how AI should be designed, implemented, and regulated. Helena Hallberg suggests that vocalists could license AI clones of their voices as VSTs, that's virtual studio technology plugins, that integrate with DAWs. And in fact, she and Eric Holloway have taken steps towards doing this themselves in order to gain a new revenue stream. Participants in our study likewise cited transparency as an important component of an ethical AI landscape. In voice clones, this references 3 major areas of concern: crediting the sources of AI-generated material, disclosing when AI is used to create a song or piece of content, and disclosing environmental impacts. Crediting vocalists when they are the sources or inspiration for an AI clone or piece of music both ensures that proper attribution is achieved and enables voice professionals to better track uses of their voice for compensation and royalties. And the vocalists we surveyed also felt that because rampant misuse of voices have a prominent role in spreading misinformation, clearly labeling content as AI generated can help with issues of public trust. And finally, we advocate for keeping control of voices with vocalists themselves, which means ensuring that they retain ownership of their voices. This, along with transparency around training data, can help ensure consensual use of AI voices. When asked, has your voice or music ever been used by AI without your consent? 4 participants, including Hallberg and Holloway, responded yes, that's shown in blue. 1 responded no, shown in red, and the remainder, shown in yellow, said not sure, a reflection of the lack of transparency from AI companies about how they are training their voices and where they obtain their data. Most generative AI companies gather data by scraping content from the internet or publicly available materials without informing creators or asking for consent. The few that do have a structure for consent operate on an opt-out model, which means they will automatically use a creator's content for their training data if they wish, unless that creator contacts them to opt out of the data. Not only is this a poor model for true consent, which requires transparency and asking prior to doing, but it is difficult, if not impossible, to disentangle influence from a creator's work in an AI model once it has been trained on their work. Hallberg and other participants call for what many in the creative fields have supported, which is an opt-in model, where AI companies must obtain permission from creators before including them in the training data. Treating voices as data has led to a devaluing of voice professionals on multiple fronts. Their voices can now be recreated without credit or compensation and can effectively labor on their own, threatening livelihoods of the vocalists from whom they emanated. Just as we have long required broader data protections for US citizens engaging with technology, we likewise need to protect voice, as data if we must, from being exploited by tech companies for easy profit. As a vocalist myself, I am uneasy at the idea that I must own my voice to protect it. I agree with Hallberg that our voices mean so much more to us than our livelihoods. They are part of our voices and identities, our means of conversing and sharing our ideas. Nevertheless, the need for protection for vocalists is clear. Michael and I hope that our model for compensation, transparency, and control can serve as a guide for ethical practices for AI companies and encourage a sustainable voice work ecosystem in an uncertain time. Thank you very much.
Can you go back to the slide or bar graph of what folks were concerned about? Thank you, that one, yeah. This was so great. And forgive my very under-caffeinated formulation of a question. So when I think about AI as someone who does not think about it in a research capacity, I think about it as being a fucking disaster. And those things down at the very bottom, like significant cognitive decline and environmental impact, are the things that I would have. So my question is, in advocating models of sustainability for the voices and by extension the other kinds of human labor that these machines need in order to continue functioning, is there some sort of way in which we are keeping those technologies alive when what they really need to do is go away forever? Should we be opting out of labor rather than making the labor more sustainable in some kind of a way, to the extent that we're going to start experiencing rolling blackouts and environmental degradation and all that kind of thing? So it's, does that make sense?
Oh, totally. Yes, that's a great and important point, one that many of the participants share with you. And what you see at the bottom, those three, are what people wrote in. We had these options at the top for people to up until none of the above were our suggestions for what people might be concerned about. And then in other, people wrote cognitive decline, environmental impacts, the quality of the work. So it's definitely something that people, including these vocalists, are concerned about, and many of them told us, I wouldn't use AI ever. The risks are too great, and we don't know enough about it, and the issue of transparency is so important. Many concerned about environmental impacts that we didn't really ask about in our survey, and many talked about that. So I think, part of the reason that Michael and I are working together on this is that his interventions with how AI as a tool can sort of be like put back into the hands of creators themselves and used to foster their careers in a creative field where it's difficult to make money, as we all know, is so exciting, and that's sort of where we see this project going. So we have a bit of that slant to it, where we're thinking, this is happening, and we want to use this technology to give something back to the people who are actually responsible for it. But it's such an important question of, should we be doing this at all? And I think there are probably types of AI where we should just not, and types where, maybe it's interesting and maybe it can foster innovation in the ways that we love. Maybe we can hack it and misuse it in cool ways. So I feel conflicted about it, as do many people.
Thank you again for this. This has been a really great panel. So I wanted to ask a historical kind of question, and maybe trying the surveys that you've done for your experience as a vocalist. So I'm struck, this is something I've seen that I do in buildings in your time. This language, I was struck by this language of the voices of the
Yeah.
Do you think that that's something that kind of emerges that kind of language, the voice as an organ, as a limb, as a kind of some sort of movable property, something that kind of emerges as a kind of like a reaction formation to the datification of the voice, or do you think it's something that language is around before it becomes more charged, because that's one of the ways to come to your sentence, to think you're uncomfortable with it.
Yeah.
I think we all are, the voice is something that can be owned, and it is sort of like a limb, but it also isn't exactly. So you cut off your hands, it's not forever. Your voice, it's more complicated, the physiology of it, right? So I was curious, like, kind of history, some of the history, research of those kinds of metaphors.
What an excellent question. Not exactly in the sort of like as a limb or as a part of the body, but something this makes me think about a lot is the voice as an object, which I think is something that has been with us since recordings. I think, as soon as we're able to record a voice, we're able to sort of treat it as an object. And so that, I think, very long history sort of enables the kind of thinking now about treating voice as data because it has been objectified for such a long time. I think I am interested in sort of thinking about, even when it is recorded, even when it is sort of separated from a physical body, what is its relationship then still to the body, and how can we account for that in models like AI that are exploitative of that sort of disembodiment that happens. I'd love to know if other folks have more history about like how metaphors of the body and voice have been used throughout history, but that's kind of my sense of it.
Oh yes, that'd be great.
Hello, really great talk. I love that you contacted all these artists and really started a dialogue. I was wondering what you had in mind for this specific graph about ethical concerns, because if I read the first 5, I think those are all pretty ethical, and then the bottom 3, that's also ethical, so I just like, I just wish you didn't include it because I want to force an answer.
Yeah.
And like just the thoughts on adding that as a selection.
Oh, yes. I've got to think back to, I think we were intending it as a catch-all for some of the things, for some of the broader ethical concerns that we might not have covered in the above. I think that's sort of what we meant. But yeah, they're all ethical concerns, and that's what we mean by ethics in AI is also sort of like dependent on what your perspective is. These companies likely think they're operating ethically, or at least they don't care that others have ethical differences between what they're doing and what we would think was ethical. So it's a bit of a catch-all. And yeah, I agree with you that because of that category is maybe like less useful as a research category.
Options could really throw one of these where you have a lot of ties.
Yeah.
It could be $1, I don't know. I don't think we'll ever stop talking about it. So.
That's true. But also, I should say that we have this select up to 3 there. Many of the participants selected all of them. They just sort of went down the board and selected all of them and ignored that direction. So yeah, that sort of skews things too a little bit, I think. Thank you.
I'm afraid we're out of time, so maybe people could come up and talk to our speakers afterwards. I'm sure they will. But let's give them another round of applause.